Hello and welcome to KJ's Crash Course. I am KJ here to bring you exercise 5, what I like to call bringing it all together. Up to this point, assuming you've followed the crash course, you've built a basic automation to log into the application that you see here. You've learned the concept of a variable and how to create them. You've learned how to complete the RPA challenge. And if you decided to go ahead with the bonuses, you learned how to speed that automation or any automation up, on top of learning VB expressions as well and how to iterate through data tables using system activities. You've learned how to interact with email, downloading a file, saving that attachment, using it, and then even scraping from a web page as well and sending an email back. And now finally, we're going to bring all of that kind of together here and add a little bit more to your, I would call it your development vocabulary, so you can virtually build any automation that you want. I would argue if you can complete exercise 5 by following along, um, as much as I'm going to say you should go on and take the foundations coursework if you're going to be a developer because you want to get the certification. If you're not, I think you're definitely equipped to get out there in the working world and start building yourself some rudimentary automations. And then in exercise 7, what you will do, which is really just kind of where do we go from here, you can follow more of what that functional analyst would do and just learn a little bit more about how to be a better a teammate from an IT project. Okay. Otherwise, I say we get started here. Bring it all together. We're going to create more of a robust automation where the process we're actually going to follow is we are going to read a value from an email. We're going to send it. It'll be the first step that we do as we start building, where we're actually going to take this value right here from the email, log in to our specific I'm just using my personal one. I could use KJ's Crash Course. It's not going to matter. Take that specifically, log into the application, go to the work items. Actually, remember how we scraped one single value? We're actually going to scrape all of these values here, right? If the type is work item 4, which is generate yearly report for vendor, go to that specific action, update work item, add the comment, which is the description, right? We're going to pull that, change the status to completed, update the work item, and repeat that process for all work items that match. Where is it? Right here, match to, right? That match that work item 4 scenario. So the status shows completed. Okay. So as you can tell, there's a lot there. It can sound daunting, but if we think about it, what were the steps that we performed? We've already done the login before. We've already read a value from an email before, so it's just going to be a little bit more of some finagling with that. And then we're going to learn a new activity to scrape all of this, but it's going to follow the same things you've seen before. And then all the steps after that. What was it? Well, click a button, which I'm going to show you another way to go specifically to the work item, which is going to be super, super cool for y'all to understand, right? Click update work item, type into a specific field, choose something here, update work item, etc. So you've done all the activities up to this point. We're going to add a little bit more logic to this and give you, like I said, all of the vocabulary or really all the tools in your tool belt you're going to need to build robust automations. Okay, so let me log out here and we'll use my KJ's Crash Course ones because the work items haven't been worked there, although there is a reset option there. All right, that is the exercise we're going to complete. So how we do that, right, is as follows. First thing you're going to do, or I'm going to want you to do, is send yourself an email with the title or the subject, work items to complete, and then put something in this text. You could theoretically just pull in WI, it's W and then uppercase I and then 4. That's not a 1. You could put that in the body of the email and that's fine. I'm actually going to teach you guys how to write a substring. Not every time are you going to be able to say, oh, all emails need to just have the body be what I'm pulling and that's it, right? Sometimes you're going to need to parse that out. I'm going to show you how to do that using an assign activity, which is super, super cool. So go ahead and send yourself an email, work items to complete as the subject, and then I would put something like this line here, colon, and then have W I, uppercase 4 as your final option here. And that'll make sense when we go through the exercise. Second thing I want you to do is go to your exercise 1 and open it up. Most of the time, what I've been having y'all do is go to, if we wanted to create another project, copy and paste this over. You can also copy activities from one project to another. So we're actually going to do that with a login because there's no sense in recreating the wheel. Okay, so that's what we're going to do here. And then we're going to wrap it in some other logic there as well. So a lot's coming your way, but like I said, you've learned all the fundamentals up to this point. I guarantee you can complete this exercise no problem. All right, so let's get started. After you've sent that email to yourself and opened up your project, right, go ahead, open up Studio, and we're going to create our final project of exercise 5. Yep, so right here in process, go to process. I'm going to call this complete yearly report work items, because that's what they were. Exercise 5. The final, it's really the final practical, right? From what we're building, which is pretty awesome. There will be a bonus as well that are going to add some additional coding concepts as well, which might make your life a little bit easier. Feel free to follow that, and that link will be in the description as well. Otherwise, name, description, click create, and we are going to get started here. All right, cool. So we are in, and if we think about this exercise, reading data from here and then doing all of the work inside the application, they're kind of two separate processes. So we're actually going to just segment some of this out a little bit easier. And then remember how we were changing the scope on some variables? This is going to start to make more sense as we use it throughout the whole automation. Okay. So if we think about this process, right? Once again, this is the one, and then doing the data here is another. And you could even break that out into, logging in as its own separate automation, grabbing the data items could be its own separate automation, completing all the work items could be its own automation. That's the concept of modularization, and it's super, super important to keep in mind. So thinking that way as you go along in your automation journey, whether you're going to be building them or not, is going to be super, super impactful from a design perspective, right? Because before you build it, you usually want to design it. These are rudimentary examples, and personal examples are usually you can just kind of go with it. But when you start thinking about enterprise grade solutioning, right, you're going to want to have that modularization in place when working on your projects. Okay, so how we can do that in here, you can always create a sequence inside it and invoke them. I don't think it's necessary, right? I just like to just segment them with other sequences. So the first sequence I'm going to pull in is I'm going to say, why don't we, and you can always rename activities as well. I'm going to say grab work item from email. All right, so this is going to be one, and then I'm going to say this sequence, and I just wrote another one, and we'll touch the second one later. Complete work items. All right. All right, cool. So do that, and we got it. Let's minimize this one for now. Okay, so if we're going to grab the work item from the email, what do we have to do? Well, it's very similar to the last exercise we just completed. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my Use Desktop Outlook app. Choose that, references Outlook, then for each, right, email in my desktop from my inbox, no limit. I am looking for something where the subject equals work items to complete. Throw that here. Make sure we're good. Hit OK. Don't need to retrieve attachments. And then what I want to do is we want to get that value out of the email. Okay. And now from here, what we're going to do is use a little bit of a coding concept. If you did the bonus exercise in exercise 3, some of this might seem a little more familiar to you. If you haven't, it's totally okay. there will be times where you need to parse this data out, and the only way to do it is to use what we call a system expression. We can do that using what we call an assign activity. So if you want to go ahead and call an assign, here's what we're going to do. We are going to grab the body of the email. Oh, and when you do send your email, make sure you just have this line of text in there, because we're going to be doing something where we split just this out, so you're going to want to keep that. So just keep this one line in the email in case you haven't done that. If your signature's in there, resend it with just this line, and it'll make sense for the sake of demonstration. All right. So then right here, what we can do is use this activity to actually split that string out, because all we need is what? The WI4, right? And we see this delimiter, this colon. So we can use that to actually split the string out into two separate things, which is what we call an array. Array is just nothing more than a list of values. So the months of the year, January, February, March, April, May, that's an array, right? That is an array of values. So this is the same thing. So what we're actually going to do, and this might be a little confusing, but as you get through it, I think it's going to make complete sense. So what we're going to do first is go to the variables pane, and then I'm going to call it array of email body, okay, right? And then I'm going to go to variable type, and I'm going to click array of t, and then it's going to ask me an array of what? Well, it's an array of strings, because it's just an array of text values, okay? And then I'm going to leave the scope in do, and it'll make sense when we finalize this activity. What we're doing is we're going to assign a value to array of email body, and then in our VB expression, we have to say what we're going to do, what function we're going to do to assign that value. You with me so far? When we used a get text, we had a value there, we created a variable, and we took the text from it and assigned it to that value. So we're doing the same thing here. And what we want to do is get the body of that current mail. So how we're going to do that, go ahead and click this Open in Advanced Editor, so it'll be a little bit easier to see. We're going to split, that's the function, and then put parentheses, and then what is your expression as a string? Well, it's actually current mail, right? Remember this, and connecting that just like we had current row or current mail from the previous one. Current mail dot, and then you'll see everything that we can pull from really an email message, the alternate views, attachments, BCC. We want the body. So we want the body, okay? And then we want to convert that to a string, because that's how we pull text. I know it's coding, but this is VB expressions. Everything that you do, this is going to be what you do more often than not. And now that we've got the body, we've converted it into text, put a comma, and then we're going to have our delimiter as a string. So have quotes and put in the colon. So if we read this left to right, we are splitting what is in the body of the email, which is right here, by this. So this will be what is in the first array. This will be what is in the second part of the array. Okay? That is what this function is doing. So current mail dot body dot toString, put a comma, and we can see it. It shows you everything that you need. So split as we go through this. So, right, split. And then the first option is, what are we splitting? And the second one is the delimiter. So that's all we saw there, okay? And then that will go away. And then that is our first assign from a feasibility perspective. If you want to rename that and call it split, you can, okay? Now, this second part. Now that's what we've split. So we can do this in two different ways. We can just keep the array and use it. I want to create another assign activity, right? We'll create, or you can do it here, Control K, string, We'll call it work item to complete. All right. And then you'll see the string. We want to keep that because we're going to use it in our automation, and then change the scope to main sequence. Okay, and the reason we're going to do that is because once we step out of this work item to complete, we can use it in complete work items, but array email body will not be available by design because you don't need it after we just get the value from email, which is why we change the scope of variables throughout an automation. Sometimes you will have like 5 to 6 variables, but it's only one specific subset of your automation. There's no need to crowd your variables pane in the whole sequence with that. So that's why I'm showing you the difference there. Okay, so you have straight work item to complete, and then all we need to do is take this and copy it. And remember, we knew we're splitting it by this colon. So if we know we're splitting it by the colon, this is one option. This is the second option. Indexing starts at 0. So if we want the second value, we can just put array email body, and I'm going to go to open in advanced editor, array email body, and then index as an integer, right? Indexes start at 0. So the first option is 0, second option is 1, and then put to string just to be sure, even though we have an array of strings, so you're fine. And then I'm going to add a trim function as well. So if you've dealt with Excel, I'm sure you've seen stuff like this before. All we're saying is in the array of email body, I want the second option. I want to convert it to a string just to be sure, and I want to trim all white space off of it. That right there, these two activities, I know it was a little cumbersome to get through. If you learn these, there is not virtually anything you can't automate. Even if you're reading documents, if you're having trouble trying to get data from a screen, whatever, using these types of capabilities will allow you to break something down to get the exact value that you want to use it throughout your automations. I know it was a little coding heavy. It is super, super important to compound on top of your learning journey. So that's why I covered it here. Okay, so there we go. So we see that's the assign, and then we have this as the work item. I'm just updating it just so I know. And now we see if we did everything up to this point in the main sequence, I have the work item to complete. I can use that. And then just to make sure you've done everything right, you can pull in this write line activity as well. And then you can just throw in something there as well that will allow you to, in the output, see if we got the value we're looking for. So if we did this right, we should get WI4 in the output. Let's run a quick unit test to make sure this is working. And then right there, output, we see WI4. So we were successful in that. Pulling in write lines is also going to be something that'll help you, especially when you're trying to parse out data and make sure you're doing it right. You can even, in a for each, make sure you want to see the first 10 rows. You could literally put a write line that says for each row, grab the first one, you get the idea. In Excel, it'll be all the same, right? So what did we cover here? We did everything for each mail, but then what we did is we actually wrote a system expression. If you've never coded, well, you just did today. It's pretty awesome, right? So we split the email by the colon, and we grabbed the second option after the colon, which is WI4. That's what we did. Congratulations on coding. Awesome. We are done with grab work item for email. So if you want to go ahead and close that down, you can. Now we are getting into, right, complete work items. All right. So as I had mentioned before, it might be wise to go ahead and open up your original exercise 1. Why? As I had mentioned, we've always copied all of the activities before because I wanted to have different projects with that. You could just as easily, and you might yell at me for this, but I did it by design. You can just as easily copy the activities from one project and just paste them in another. Right? You can do that. Once again, there was a reason why I did it that way, because I wanted to show you other ways, because not always are you going to be able to copy everything over, nor does it make sense. Or if you know it's going to be 2 separate projects, why not just pull the whole thing? Okay. But like I said, you can just copy and paste everything over. So go ahead, copy your exercise 1, paste it into your complete work items. We're going to do something here with these 3 activities. type in an email, type in a password, and log in. And don't worry about this preview image not being available. Everything else stays consistent. If you ever look in the projects and you see the project pane, you see the I think there's a screenshots option right in there. Screenshots, that's what these are for. Or settings, designs, it's somewhere in there. I forget. Anyway, don't worry about it. Not important. Cool. So when we do this, you may be logged in when you open this application. Not always, but I wanted to introduce us to the concept of what we call a try catch to log in. The reason I want to do that is because there will be times where if you're already logged in, think Amazon, right? I mean, I have an Amazon account. When I go to Amazon, I'm already logged in. So if I want to run an automation on that, sometimes I may need to log in, sometimes I won't. This is the concept of error handling, where if it tries to run straight through and you're already logged in and you have the login activity, it's going to break your automation. So there's this concept of a try or an error handling, and what we do to handle that, rather, excuse me, I am tripping all over my words today, is we use what we call a try catch activity. Okay, so go ahead and leave the do block and pull in this try catch above everything you had in the do block before. Why? Because what we're going to do is we're going to try and perform all of these activities. So if you want to highlight all three or drag them individually, I just highlighted all three, Control X, and then in the drop activity here, I'm clicking and Control Ving, and it'll automatically create a sequence for me. Okay, so you want to get in your try the sequence of steps that were the type into your username, type into your password, and click login, right? Because we're going to try and log in. And if you're already logged in, so let's just see what this looks like here, right? KJ, and then, right? If you're already on, oh, yeah, kjscrashcourse.com. Maybe that'll be a thing. Who knows? kj.com. Click log in. If you're already here, it's going to break. So I'm going to show you how we error handle this. So you have your try to do this, and then in catch, you have to provide in a try catch an exception. So in the event of an exception, which means we're already logged in, right? What do? So you could browse for all of these if you just put system.exception 9 times or out of 10, that's going to suffice. And then let's just pull up a message box real quick that says right here, message box looks like you're already logged in. You could use a write line as well. I'm just going to use the message box just to show that it pops up. Okay, so with every try catch, it's important that you always have an exception. You can literally just choose exception and just choose system.exception there. And then I'm throwing in a message box to show what this would look like if we ran this in real time. So let's run this from the top, and hopefully, assuming this works properly, it's going to try and log in. It can't, it's going to error out, but it should give us this message, which would allow the automation to continue instead of breaking and you having to rerun it and log out. Okay, so that's why I introduced us to this concept. So let's see what happens here. Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay, so we're still here. Said I was logged in. Let's see if it did do that. Yep, we have 2 on the dashboard here. It's attaching to the screen. This is actually perfect. So we can see it's kind of hanging, right? We can see the robot's running. We don't know what's going on here. As you can see, it tried to, based on the parameters on the right, what actually happened is it opened because it tried to go to the login screen and it was already there. So it's actually really good to see. But there's no login screen on both windows that are open here. So what is it going to do? Looks like we're already logged in. So robot technically failed because it tried to type into that username field. Couldn't, but it was caught and said, you know what, you're already logged in. Let's keep moving on. So that was actually a successful run, which is pretty awesome. Okay, so we have that there. So that's what we're looking for here. I'm going to leave the message box there. Feel free to use a write line if you want. But that's the concept of error handling. You're going to use that a lot for logins. You'll use it where, let's say, if you have like maybe an edge case when you're performing a specific process. I like to think where if you choose a specific drop down on a field and like only 10% of your transactions follow this, but like sometimes you choose a specific button and 3 additional pop-ups show up, right? And you have to fill them in, right? You may put in a try catch to try and enter in those fields or whatever the case may be, right? And if it can't find those fields because it doesn't exist, it'll just move on. So just one additional notch in your tool belt, so to speak, from a development perspective. But since we're done with the login steps, let's actually now get to the point of grabbing those work items. All right. So we see we have this, we're grabbing everything that we need, we're on the work items page. So what would we do next? Well, we're going to click that work items. So pull in a click. Click work items, click confirm, right? And then moving on from there, what do? So let's just follow the process. We need to get, oh, it looks like you have no work items. Yeah, let's reset test data here. So this is something you can do as you log in for the first time. Go to user options, reset test data. Didn't realize I didn't have any. Hit reset test data. That doesn't take very long, I don't believe. And there we go. Test data has been reset. Go back to home and go to work items here. And we should have a list of work items. Perfect. Awesome. So we have everything that we were looking for. Okay. So now what we need to do is we want to scrape all of this data. Now you might be thinking, do we use a get text all this time? Theoretically, yes, but we do have an activity that allows you to define patterns and or scrape tables automatically. And it's called this table extraction button. So go ahead and click that. And then it's going to say click add new column to get started. So you click add new column and then highlight any cell in here that you want. If our software can recognize that on the back end it was coded as a table, if you click this yes when you get prompted, would you like to extract all columns from the table? We pull all the rows of data in one shot. So you can see a preview of all that data right here. Super, super impactful. Great tool. Feel like a lot of people don't use this when they start using UiPath, and I wanted to make sure y'all did. Okay, so you have this, you can see the type, etc. We could even export this as a CSV if we wanted to. A lot of cool capabilities. And then we have this option of extract data from multiple pages. We can see that there's 13 pages of data that we want here. We want to get them all and then use an if statement to go specifically to the option that is of the type WI4, which is why we pulled that variable in the first place. Okay, so check yes. It's going to ask you to indicate the next button. Click the next button. Hit save and close. And now you have a full-blown activity here that stored. It automatically created a data table for you, right, to store in from here that is going to save all of that data to extract data table, and we're going to use that in the next corresponding activities. Okay. So then moving on here on extract, what we need to do now is we're going to use the Excel activities. I think the Excel activities are what we've been doing in the previous exercises. They're very easy. An easy way to write data to an Excel is as follows. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull in a write range workbook. Okay, we can use write data table to Excel, but I want to introduce us to this activity. I think it's super, super impactful, important, and I don't think a lot of people leverage it in the way that they should. So let's pull this under the extract data table exercise. Here's the reason why. You can create an Excel with this activity. So we do have create if not exists at Excel, and we can do the same thing, but I want to just introduce this activity as well because it is pretty cool. So if we just throw in something here, and I'm going to call it extract data table values dot XLSX. Okay, So if you wanted to create a CSV, you could put .csv. If you want to create an XLS file, which I think is just excel.dx, I think it's an older version, you can put XLS. That's what's super cool, is that you can just create these out of nowhere with this activity. So I wanted to introduce it. We're going to throw the data into sheet 1. The cell will be A1 is where we're going to write it. And then what's the data table we're writing? Extract data table, which is what came from extract table data. Okay, so if we look at this, let's just follow this from the beginning. We're grabbing the work item from the email. We already went through that. Now what you're doing is you're going to go here, make sure you log in, click work items, extract the data, and then we're going to get something in our project folder. So if you want to go ahead and click this project tab, because we're going to go back to it here in a minute and show you how we can pull stuff right from here. Right, we're going to see, we should see an Excel sheet with extract data table values. So if you want to go ahead and run a unit test to make sure this is working, log out. That'll probably be your easiest way, right? Leave that there and then just make sure we're running this. And let's get that Excel file so we can use it in the next activity. Here is that it seems like it's hanging up, like it's taking a little bit of time. There is a default timeout parameter that you can look at in the properties pane that allows you to change the timeout. I believe the timeout default is 30 seconds by design. Like I said, you can lower it if you want to. That's all that's happening here. Not going to change anything. We got a complete there, right? It didn't error out. It was just looking for that next button. The next button didn't exist anymore. And now if we just refresh our project pane or even click this file explorer option, it'll take you directly to your project. You will see your Excel there and we should see all of the values here, right? Oh, one little property I forgot to mention with that is in your right range workbook, check add headers because we can use the headers in the Excel moving forward. Okay. And knowing that we just checked the add headers parameter, I'm going to rerun this exercise just so I can get all those values again. Because we're going to want to use the headers, as I had previously mentioned, in the activity. So we'll let this run, and then we'll continue on after that. Cool. And now that that's done, we should see, let's refresh our Excel. And if we pop that open, we should see there's the headers that we were looking for, and we'll use that in the next section of the activities. Okay, so let's recap, right? What is the exercise we're doing? Well, we are grabbing a value from Outlook. I should probably have that open. And we are grabbing this value right here, which we've checked. And if we go look at our output pane, I do see W work item 4. If I knew how to say that out loud, I would do it all the time. We have that, so we got that officially, right? After we grab that, we grabbed all the work items, and then if the work item is of the work item 4 option, which I believe is generate yearly report, which I am not seeing right here. So yes, so generate yearly report for vendor. We are going to every option in here, and then going here, clicking update work item, and then completing that, okay? So there's a couple things I want to call out. If you'll notice, we see that the URL changes, right? And this is something that we call out when we're on page 12, it's page 12. When we're on page 3, it's page 3. And if we go into one of these specifically, we see the URL is consistent, but it looks like this changes. And it looks like we have that work item ID, which we can see inside of our Excel. So let's take a look at that. So I'm connecting all the dots because we can use this throughout our automation, which is super cool. So we could go directly to this. So assuming we know the work item ID, we could theoretically just copy and paste it and do a URL. So we're going to learn an activity to do that. All right. And then that's how we're going to loop through. So instead of you going to work items and clicking this every time, that would probably be very difficult. But if we know the unique URL, just like a bookmark, right? Whenever you bookmark a page, what is it? It's a unique URL. It's the same concept in automation. So try to pay attention to that as you're building out your automations, and it will also make your automations a little more robust. Let me close this down. Pre-sales collective. Thank you. All right, cool. So moving on here. So now let's get to that part. So in our workflow, we are here. We're going to use Excel. We have the Excel. That's the reason we created it. We didn't need to. If you followed bonus on the exercise 3, you could have theoretically just wrote it to a data table and looped through using VB expressions. I am actually creating a bonus for that as well. However, to that point, I just want to use Excel because I think it's easier for everyone to understand. So how do we do that? Well, first thing is we use the Excel process scope. So we're going to pull that in here, and then everything moving forward is going to be inside of the Excel. So go ahead and double click that. Okay. And then what are we doing? Well, we're using a specific Excel file. I'm going to go ahead and close this down because it'll probably yell at me. Right? Use the Excel file. What are we using specifically? We are using the Excel file that we created that we put in a project. So go ahead. It should automatically direct you, and you should be there. Okay. If it is not there, wherever you saved it from the, wherever you saved it in this path, if you copied this, it's in the project. If you put see users, my documents, etc., be sure to study that as well. Okay, so double clicking back into this Excel process scope, use this. We can save changes, but we are not creating it because it already exists. And then what are we going to do? Well, first thing we're going to do is that we need to loop through all of the rows of data. So how do we do that? Well, we've done this before for each Excel row. Okay, so you go for each Excel row. We'll check the has headers because that's why we wrote the headers in the Excel to begin with. And then in range, Excel, sheet 1. Fantastic. Awesome. So now moving on here. All right, first thing we need to do is we need to only use the option if it, or use the record if it says, if it's work item 1 or work item 4, okay? So how we do that, and this is a new activity, is the concept of an if statement. So go ahead and search for an if, and then pull in an if, okay? And in this if, it'll say, if we do something, then perform a specific action, else do nothing. So the way we're going to treat it is that if the work item, which would be the field in the Excel, so let's just pop that open just so we can reference it. If the work item equals WI4, which is that variable we saved in the way beginning of the exercise, then complete the work item. Else, do nothing. Right? Because we don't need to complete that work item, okay? So you could theoretically filter this, and that's in the bonus exercise. However, we're going to use an if statement because if statements are going to be super, super important as you build more automations. So I'm going to collapse the else block in the if, and then I'm going to start using here. So there is a bug that I do need to report to our team, but we're going to write some coding here because if we wanted to do like a type into, for example, right? So we can use the type into, and then remember how we can use this plus icon for current row, right? So go ahead and follow that and do it, and we're going to code it backwards. We should be able to do it in the if statement, but I have to report to the team there's a reason it's not pulling through. So y'all are learning in real time that, hey, not everything's perfect, and sometimes we can even use exercises like this to enhance our products, which is super cool. But go ahead, pull in a type into, and then do current row. We want to see if the type equals that. So we just use the type into to grab the syntax and then copy it and then paste it here. Okay. So, I mean, I think that makes sense. In the current row of data, which is in sheet 1, which is what we wrote that stuff to, we're looking for the field type, which is the column header here. Okay. So I think that's all straightforward. And we want to see if it equals, we could put that in, because that's what we're looking for, or we can use the value that we pulled from the email in the beginning of the exercise. Both are going to work. So let's say maybe in the email it said WI5 or WI3 or WI2. That's the purpose of using the variable. See how that makes sense? Where we're trying to assign a value based on what we see, because you'll still be able to pull the value out from here, but it may not always be WI4, right? So that's why we're having it equal the variable here, all right? I just pulled the type into so we could use the syntax. Go ahead and Control D, right? Or right click on the type into and then hit disable activity. I just did that twice, but you get the idea. It minimized that, so it's out of sight, out of mind. If it's commented out, I don't know if I ever alluded to that. If it's commented out, that means in the it's something that's just like kind of like an artifact in the code that could be used for commenting. It could be used for whatever. It will not perform that action when you run it. Okay, so that's why we're commenting it out. So if the work item is WI4, because that's what we know the value is, then we perform our action. Okay, so now if we have the if all situated, so we know we're pulling this row and this row and this row and this row and so on and so forth. How do we do it? Well, if we've already scraped the data, we just got to go directly to the item. So there's an activity called go to URL. So let's pull that into the sequence, and that'll be our first activity. Go to URL, and the URL must be quoted. So what do we know the URL will always be? So once again, applying what you've learned and adding some coding principles. We know it'll always be acme.test.uipath work items. We know it'll always be that. So let's throw that in here. And then if you've ever, and we got to make sure we put that in quotation marks. And if you've ever done anything in Excel with a concatenate function, that's exactly what we're going to do here. It's the same thing. So now let's hit plus. And then what are we going to do? Well, we're going to use the current row. And then we're going to go to the work item ID. Okay, it deleted it, so we'll have to redo it. But you can see right there, right? The work item ID. Why? Because we know that this work item ID works. So let's try this out. So if I grab the work item ID, and we can just scroll up and we can see that's what it was, and I throw it in here, it gave me that work item ID and a different work item, as we saw. So we're going to use that. So we unintentionally overwrote the work item ID there. So let's copy this and add it to the beginning of this, because if we just see this in the advanced editor, we can see it was just there. So easy way to do that. Just control all the way over, or make sure you got your cursor right there, copy, and then you can right click and paste if you want to. I think Control V is probably your best way to go, right? Make sure you put all of that in quotation marks and then hit plus. A little cumbersome there, so I'm going to step into the advanced editor so you can see what the full syntax should look like. So this is what needs to be in that go to URL field. Right, once again, I don't think it's that complicated. This is the concept behind coding. Once you learn this, there really isn't anything you're not going to be able to do from an automation perspective, I promise you, and you've already taken the steps to learn how all this works. All right, so that's what's in the go to URL, and now the rest of it's pretty easy. Now from here, what do we do to complete a work item? Well, we click that update work item. All right, so now that we've clicked the update work item button, now once we do, we'll follow that manually, and we can see it generates a new window. Best practice is that whenever a new window pops up, even if it's kind of a pop-up, pull in another use application/browser activity. It'll help limit the scope. If we notice the windows themselves are very similar, Acme System 1, Google Chrome, and then if we look at the difference between the two, right, it's not too much different between them. It's a URL change, but everything else is very consistent, so that'll help the robot nail it down specifically to that specific window. So just like you'd expect, indicate application to automate, you'll get that debugging the browser, no need to worry there. Okay. Then what we do is first thing is we're going to type into that specific description per the exercise. So indicate, what are we typing into? We're typing into that comments field. And then you can see right there, comments, anchors, we hit confirm. And then the next thing, what are we going to do? I say we just use current row description, current row by field description. If we scroll up, oh, current row by field type, current row by field WIID. Welcome to coding, where current row dot by field is the actual syntax, and you just need to change your own parameter, right? That's how I learned coding. It's how I learned how to write macros. It's how all coders, if you ask people who are coders how they learn to code, they go to Stack Overflow, find what they're looking for, or they've got their own libraries that they can pull from, and then they just edit that accordingly. This is very similar. Let a tool generate the code for you, and then you just learn it and how to read it on your own. Okay, so then type into. So then the next thing would be, oh, we need to choose completed. Now you could click and click. Now I want this to be an educational moment, and then I'll tell you when to come back. So just sit tight if you've already pulled in that type into. We should be able to use a select item activity, which if we see this, it allows us to select an item from a drop-down list. So you think that would make sense, right? So if we pull that in and we try to spy this box, it doesn't actually work. And the reason that it doesn't actually work is because on the back end, it's not coded as a combo box. So this needs to be coded as a combo box in order for this activity to work. Keep it in your tool belt as something you can use when you do have those lists that you want to choose from. It can be very, very helpful when you have a combo box with like 400 records and you just need to choose a specific one. You can also put code in there, which is awesome. So it'll choose a specific one based on a set of text, which is awesome. But we can't use it for this exercise. So we're not going to do a click. We're actually going to use a type into activity. And this is kind of a hack, but I think it's super cool. So what we can do is in a type into, you'll notice the parameters here where we have empty field before typing and click before typing. If we know we can click before typing, if we click this manually and we hit the down arrow 3 times and hit enter, don't we get the same result? So on top of using a click and a click, we can also send hotkeys, theoretically. We do have a send hotkey activity that you can use. However, that's really good for, it's actually keyboard shortcuts. It's good for like Control C, Control V, Control Alt Delete, things like that, that you can run. But go ahead and pull in that type into, spy the box. I'm just going to get this back to the 3 dashes here. Spy the whole box. So it anchors to, and then I'm going to change this anchor to be new status instead. So if you want to do that, and you get here, this was the anchor originally, make sure the anchor is highlighted, click delete anchor, or you can just click the button over here and then highlight new status on the anchor there, click confirm, and you're good to go. Okay. And then what are we typing? Well, we're not going to do that. If we hit that down arrow, here's every key on your keyboard, essentially. So we're going to search for down. And that's the syntax. And then just a nice little trick. If you want to send that 3 times, you can just copy that text twice. Or you can choose the down arrow over and over and over again. And then let's add an enter. And we can see right here, this is going to send a down arrow, down arrow, down arrow, and enter. Right? And you'll notice right here that we do have this delay between keys activity. Go ahead and put 0.2 in there. Delay between keys is in seconds. I just want to give a little bit of a delay just to make sure that this doesn't work. Once again, click and click is going to be just as effective. I just wanted to show you this hotkey technique because there's a lot of people who don't recognize that this exists, and I think it's a super cool thing to help you build robust automations. Okay, so there we go. We got that. Type into. Then what do we do? So let's just do this. So generate yearly, new status completed. We're going to click that update work item. So we can go ahead, and if you hit this plus icon, it'll give you suggested options, which is pretty cool. Haven't done that throughout the exercises, but figured I might as well do it here. Click, update work item. Fantastic. If we follow this manually to see what happens, we get a OK button that pops up saying the work item was completed successfully. So once again, let's do that. Indicate in target on screen. It'll change our scope automatically. Click OK. And then last thing we're going to do is just close down this box, right? So a couple ways we could do it. We could obviously click the X button, or if we go to the parameters pane here and change close to never, that's awesome. We also need to change the open to never and close to always, rather, excuse me. Right? We also need to change open to never. And the reason that is that by default, if this window isn't open, it will try to open a new window entirely. The work item's not always going to be that. So what we want to tell it to do is that we know this window will open if we click window update work item. So we never want this to be opened because we know it's already going to be open, but we do want it to always close after we update, which is why we update the parameters close to always and open to never. So you can see that, and you pull it out a little bit, you can see what it looks like there. Okay, so assuming we've done that, that is, I believe, the completion of the exercise. You can stay logged in if you want because we did error handle it accordingly. I'm just going to close this down. And we're going to see what happens. And assuming you've built everything to here, you should get a full-blown run. And we will check our work items after we're done to make sure that the type of WI4 is completed. So let's give it a whirl. So as you can see, it looks like we're already logged in. So if we take a look at the code while this is running real quick, we do have that try catch with that activity. It's going to try and do this. It didn't catch, and our exception was the message box. So super, super impactful activity to help us out. But we're already logged in, so let it keep going. And looks like our window was closed down, so you can always go change that parameter to never, but let's navigate to our Acme items and see if they were all completed. So Acme, and if we go to work items, let's take a look. We can see that one was completed, and there was none there. Completed, completed. Just going through all the pages here. Completed, completed. Completed. Completed, completed, completed. And let's just go to the last page because I don't think we need to step through all of them. Y'all feel free to go ahead and do that if you want. Completed, completed. And see if there's any on the last page here. And there was nothing there. Cool. So that is a full-blown exercise, bringing it all together. You learned a lot today. We went through the concept of an assign activity, using it to actually parse data out from an email, right? So right there, using a split string function to do that, super impactful. We learned a write line, which is helpful from a debugging perspective. We learned what a try catch was. We learned what the extract data table activity was, the one where we actually just clicked the cell and it pulled the whole thing. How to write range and create an Excel, an if statement, and then how to navigate directly to a URL. So there was a lot in this exercise, but I don't think it was that daunting. Why? Because you knew all the foundation leading up to it. You knew how to put things together. You learned a little bit about some syntax, and we just dragged it all together into something that you may find yourself completing, or something similar of that scenario where you do need to take data from an email and you need to use that value throughout your exercise. In whatever work that you do, you probably do this more often than you think. Maybe you pull a value from a specific website, for example. Maybe you do read from Excel a lot, and knowing those Excel activities to be able to iterate through it is awesome. Otherwise, if you completed this, you're already well on your way to, if you decided to complete the foundations coursework, which I really hope that you do, in UiPath. This is actually a small subset of the advanced exercises at the end. So if you can get through this, I'd say you're ready, which is pretty awesome. Obviously a little bit more tuning and you'll want to go through the courses, but you get the idea. Otherwise, that's all I have for exercise 5. The following exercise, we are actually going to learn how to publish any automation you've created to Assistant. So I don't know if you've seen Assistant pop up here. If you haven't, that's okay, but there's no automations available. I'm going to show you how, instead of opening up Studio every time to run an automation, we can publish it to this tray and do it in one click instead. And then we will finalize out our crash course with where do we go from here, and what are some valuable tricks of the trade, and what would we do to continue our journey, and I'll walk you through some suggestions I have around that. There is going to be a bonus exercise as well, where instead of needing a single line in our signature, or a single line rather, we can add a signature or anything else in this, and I'll show you another activity we can use to parse that data. And then instead of using an if statement to see if it equals our WI4, we can filter by that instead and use that data table. So that'll be the exercise. We will just edit this workflow and take things out as we need to. So that is it. I hope you had some fun. I hope you learned a lot. It was a lot, but I threw it at you on this because, hey, that's how a practical works. And in the real world, you got to just do the work. So otherwise, this is KJ signing off. I hope to see you with exercise 6 and or completing the bonus exercise. Cheers, y'all.